believe you truly know yourself? Rational, balanced, incapable of genuine malice. Perhaps even confident in your emotional maturity, your psychological insight, how deeply you understand your own mind. But what if I told you that this entire self-image, this conviction of self-knowledge, this belief in your own transparency, might be nothing more than an elaborate self-deception? There exists within you a realm you systematically avoid exploring, a primitive, unacceptable, instinctual dimension. It exists within your psyche, regardless of your denials. Carl Jung named this the shadow. This isn't metaphorical language. It represents psychological reality, and your continued denial only amplifies its influence over your life. Have you ever surprised yourself with sudden outbursts that seemed foreign to your character? Have you ever felt compelled toward behaviors you knew were harmful? Have you ever undermined your own achievements, destroyed connections that mattered to you, made decisions that defied your own rational analysis? Pay close attention. Perhaps your conscious self wasn't truly in charge. Perhaps it was this disowned aspect of your personality, the dimension you've banished to your psychological underground, the part you conceal most carefully from your own awareness. Jung observed, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This is the fundamental trap. You imagine yourself as the conscious author of your choices, but in reality, you're being guided by psychological forces operating beneath your awareness. Your shadow, rejected and abandoned, manipulates your decisions. When this occurs, the results can be devastating. This presentation isn't theoretical psychology. It isn't academic speculation. It's a confrontation, a psychological mirror, a direct challenge to anyone who has sensed that something within them operates beyond conscious control. Anyone who has felt haunted by impulses they cannot acknowledge. Anyone who wonders why they repeat identical self-defeating patterns, emotional reactions, life-destroying behaviors. Today, we will expose this shadow dimension. We will examine it without evasion. We will understand its formation, its persistence, and the consequences of continued avoidance. Most importantly, how to integrate it before the damage becomes irreversible. Because understand this clearly, if you refuse to confront your shadow, it will discover methods to dominate you, and you won't recognize its influence. You will attribute your struggles to external circumstances, other people, random misfortune. But the truth remains. The saboteur operates from within. Are you prepared to encounter the aspects of yourself you've spent decades avoiding? To comprehend your shadow's nature and its psychological power, we must return to your origins, not your adult experiences or adolescent struggles. We must examine your childhood because those early years are where your shadow begins its formation. Picture this scenario. You are a young child, overflowing with natural impulses. You express frustration through tears. You display jealousy openly. You act from pure self-interest when you desire something. You are spontaneous, unedited, completely genuine. But slowly, the authority figures surrounding you begin molding this raw authenticity. Don't cry, you're being too sensitive. Share your toys, don't be greedy. Good children don't talk back to adults. Stop showing off, you're embarrassing yourself. Big boys don't act scared. Nice girls don't get dirty. And you adapt. You discover that certain aspects of your nature are forbidden. You realize that expressing particular emotions labels you as problematic. That wanting certain things makes you difficult. That showing certain impulses makes you troublesome. What becomes your response? You begin concealing those authentic parts. You suppress your anger. You hide your selfishness. You deny your jealousy. You disguise your genuine desires with socially acceptable alternatives. Gradually, systematically, you construct a persona, a socially approved identity, the image of the compliant child, the perfect student, the ideal employee, the devoted partner. But while constructing this acceptable facade, something else develops in your psychological depths, something you refuse to acknowledge, something you deny exists. Jung's shadow encompasses everything you have rejected about your authentic self, not merely your genuine flaws, but also your vital energies deemed socially inappropriate, your natural assertiveness, Your authentic desires, your raw sexuality, your primal instincts, your unfiltered genuineness, everything incompatible with the role you were required to adopt. All of this was exiled to your psychological basement, where it remained, accumulating power. Here lies the crucial insight. The shadow doesn't vanish through neglect. The opposite occurs. Increased repression generates increased power. Worse, it begins expressing itself through disguised channels, unconscious behaviors, emotional overreactions, inexplicable choices, self-sabotaging patterns, your internal critic. The shadow resembles a starving predator in confinement, and you believe it's safely contained until the restraints finally break. Jung recognized something few possess the courage to accept. We are not simply what we present to the world. We are primarily what we hide from ourselves. The shadow isn't merely a repository of negative characteristics. It represents the most human, authentic, instinctual dimension of your being. Rejecting it means rejecting your own humanity. This is why it invariably returns. When it does return, when it finally breaks through your defenses, you don't recognize your reflection. This is when behaviors you label mistakes emerge. Words you speak and immediately regret, actions you promise never to repeat. But repetition occurs because your conscious mind isn't controlling these moments. The shadow directs your choices, and you continue attributing this to misfortune. But what if this personal shadow could manifest as something far more dangerous when provided with appropriate conditions and social permission? Next, we will examine how individual shadows can become collective horrors, and how this explains ordinary people's capacity for extraordinary evil. If this exploration resonates with you, please subscribe to support this content. Do you believe certain individuals are born inherently evil? That some humans possess an innate darkness absent in others? This perspective provides comfort. It establishes clear boundaries between yourself and the monster, between moral individuals and criminals, between you and those who violate every ethical principle. But this separation represents an illusion. The researcher who courageously demolished this comforting fiction was social psychologist Stanley Milgram through one of psychology's most disturbing experiments, the obedience studies. In the early 1960s, Milgram recruited ordinary citizens from New Haven. Teachers, engineers, postal clerks, laborers, people with no history of violence or psychological disorders. He told them they were participating in a learning experiment. Each participant was assigned the role of teacher and instructed to deliver what they believed were electric shocks to a learner in another room whenever they answered questions incorrectly. The shocks started at 15 volts and increased by 15-volt increments up to a lethal 450 volts. The machine was clearly labeled with warnings: danger, severe shock at the highest levels. As the voltage increased, participants heard screams, pleas to stop, and eventually ominous silence from the other room. Unknown to them, no real shocks were being delivered. The learner was an actor following a script. The participants believed every scream was real. But here's what shattered our understanding of human nature. 65% of ordinary people administered what they believed were lethal electric shocks to an innocent person, simply because an authority figure in a lab coat insisted they continue. These weren't sadists or psychopaths. They were your neighbors, colleagues, perhaps people exactly like you. They showed visible distress, sweating, trembling, stuttering, yet they continued. Their shadow had been given permission to emerge through the simple phrase, "The experiment requires that you continue." Milgram discovered that evil isn't a personality defect. Evil represents a potential dormant within everyone, waiting for the right conditions to surface. When appropriate circumstances emerge, legitimate authority, gradual escalation, diffusion of responsibility, the shadow gains permission for unrestrained expression. These ordinary people didn't become cruel because they possessed inherent evil. They became cruel because their shadows finally received permission for expression through obedience. The persona of the civilized moral citizen collapsed, revealing the repressed dimension, compliant, destructive, capable of inflicting unimaginable harm. The transformation doesn't occur dramatically. It begins with minor compliance, a small shock justified as necessary for science. Each subsequent step becomes easier to rationalize until you find yourself administering what you believe is lethal voltage to a screaming human being. When you remain unconscious of your shadow, it discovers expression channels. These channels can transport you to destinations you never imagined possible. Carl Jung and Stanley Milgram never collaborated, yet their insights converge with disturbing precision. Jung described repression creating internal demons. Milgram demonstrated what happens when external authority permits those demons to escape their psychological cages. Together, they reveal human evil's complete portrait. It isn't external, it's internal. It only requires appropriate circumstances for dominance. Perhaps you're thinking, these are extreme examples. I don't possess absolute power. How can I recognize if my shadow already influences me in subtle, everyday situations? In our next section, we will identify the quiet signs that your shadow currently operates in your life, working behind the scenes. You may recognize yourself more than you wish to admit. You don't require absolute power to experience shadow domination. It rarely manifests, obviously. The shadow doesn't announce itself. It operates through whispers. This makes it particularly dangerous because it functions silently, in subtext, camouflaged under explanations you provide yourself. It disguises itself in behaviors you label just my nature, my personality, my temperament. But careful observation reveals that your conscious self isn't truly directing these responses. Consider this common example: disproportionate irritation toward people with different viewpoints, automatic disdain for individuals displaying greater confidence, success, or freedom than yourself, the harsh internal judgments you make when witnessing others' failures or achievements. These reactions don't emerge randomly. They represent projections, reflections. Jung explained that what most irritates us in others provides insight into ourselves. What disturbs you most about other people almost always reflects something you've repressed within yourself. Another clear indicator: self-sabotage. Have you approached significant achievements, promotions, relationships, life transformations, only to inexplicably destroy everything? Procrastinating when action was required, speaking when silence was needed, creating unnecessary conflicts? The shadow operates precisely this way. It resists your growth because development requires confronting what you've been avoiding. It prefers maintaining familiar patterns, even destructive ones. It thrives on your stagnation. Consider those uncontrollable emotional eruptions. Have you experienced hatred that seemed disproportionate, jealousy that appeared irrational, envy you attempted to disguise as constructive criticism? These intense emotional reactions directly manifest shadow content. They represent denied, repressed aspects of yourself, now demanding attention in the most destructive ways possible, hijacking your behavior without conscious recognition. The shadow also reveals itself through excessive virtue. When you try too intensely to appear good, balanced, enlightened, peaceful, be suspicious. Excessive virtue can mask unconscious defenses against impulses you fear most within yourself. The person who prides themselves on endless patience may harbor tremendous rage. The individual claiming complete emotional detachment may be fleeing their own desperate neediness. The shadow isn't merely what seems ugly, it's what feels authentic but remains unaccepted. Here's a challenging truth: the more you define yourself exclusively through positive qualities, the more your negative aspects will control you, because everything you refuse to integrate eventually possesses you. Now that you're identifying these patterns, the most disturbing question emerges. What if your carefully constructed good person identity actually represents a sophisticated method for keeping your shadow imprisoned? Let's now demolish the greatest illusion, that you are fundamentally virtuous. Let's expose the truth no one wants to hear. You are not as good as you believe. Everything you fear most about human nature continues to exist within you. Do you consider yourself fundamentally decent? Perhaps you genuinely believe this. After all, you don't deliberately harm others. You attempt kindness. You want to behave ethically. But what if this goodness represents construction, a social mask, protective armor you developed to avoid confronting your most brutal aspects? Society conditioned you to believe goodness means suppressing anger, limiting desires, avoiding selfishness, restraining destructive impulses. But emotions don't disappear through denial. They relocate to your consciousness's basement. There, they transform into something darker, more corrosive, more dangerous. You haven't eliminated envy. You've learned to call it having standards. You haven't abandoned the desire for power. You've learned to disguise it as helping others. You haven't stopped being cruel. You've learned expressing it through passive aggression, subtle manipulation, and moral superiority. Your kindness might simply be your shadow's domesticated version. Jung observed that enlightenment doesn't emerge from imagining light figures, but from making darkness conscious. Most people fail here because they refuse to see their own darkness. They want to maintain the illusion of purity, justice, moral superiority. But this pride itself expresses the shadow because it conceals something fundamental: the terror of inadequacy, the fear of discovering that within you exists cruelty, selfishness, arrogance, contempt, destructiveness. You think you're compassionate, but perhaps you're merely conflict avoidant. You believe you're humble, but you cannot tolerate others receiving more recognition. You claim indifference to status, but feel diminished witnessing others' success. This doesn't make you monstrous, it makes you human. That's precisely the point. The more you deny your humanity, the more your shadow assumes control. Authentic goodness doesn't emerge from denying internal evil. It comes from direct confrontation, recognition, and conscious choice not to act from those impulses. This represents psychological maturity. This is integration. Everything else is fantasy, emotional immaturity, and immaturity, when repressed too long, transforms into destruction, internal or external. Do you genuinely want self-knowledge? Examine what embarrasses you most, what you judge harshest in others, the thoughts you attempt to silence, because there, exactly there, your most authentic self resides. But what now? If the shadow is inevitable and already active, what can be done? How can you prevent its continued sabotage of your life, relationships, future? You will discover that the shadow need not be your enemy, because there exists a path, a demanding, uncomfortable, but liberating process called shadow integration. By now, you understand that ignoring your shadow guarantees self-destruction. But here's what almost no one reveals. Your shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It wants recognition. It wants acknowledgement. It wants integration. Precisely by ignoring it, by pretending it doesn't exist, it ends up possessing you. Jung called this process integration. It's neither simple nor comfortable. It requires courage. It demands diving into your psyche's darkest corners and accepting what you fear most about yourself, not to surrender to it, but to transform that repressed content into consciousness, strength, and authentic freedom. This process is called shadow work. It begins with a brutally honest question: what within me do I refuse to acknowledge exists? This is where you must stop self-deception. You need to acknowledge your darkest impulses without judgment, without moral condemnation, without self-pity. Do you feel envy? Acknowledge it. Do you take pleasure in seeing someone who humiliated you fail? Accept it. Have you wanted to harm someone with words or actions? Admit it, because what you don't admit controls you. But what you face, you can transform. One powerful tool is the shadow dialogue. Take paper and pen or open a blank document and write without filters, without censorship. Give voice to thoughts you would never speak aloud. Release everything you hide, even from yourself. Yes, it will be uncomfortable. Yes, you'll be frightened by discoveries. But this discomfort liberates you because the shadow doesn't want burial, it wants recognition. Another essential practice involves observing your emotional triggers. Who irritates you most? Who do you judge most harshly? What completely destabilizes you? These reactions reveal unintegrated aspects of yourself. What you project onto others actually represents unconscious attempts to expel something existing within you. The shadow reveals itself more through what you condemn in others than what you confess about yourself. Finally, learn to negotiate with your shadow. Don't fight it. Don't attempt elimination. Say, I see you. I hear you. You are part of me, but you don't control my life. This simple attitude of embracing without surrendering changes everything because it transforms fear into awareness, anger into power, insecurity into clarity. Shadow work isn't superficial self-help. It's an existential journey. It's crossing the fire of your own truth and emerging whole, more authentic, more free, more complete. Because true strength doesn't come from denying who you are. It comes from mastering what exists within you, especially what frightens you most. But even with this understanding, one question persists. Is it worth it? Facing the shadow, diving into the abyss, exposing the wounds. All of this leads to a critical moment where you realize you either face transformation's pain or continue enslaved to repetition's pain. In our final section, we will address this critical moment. There you will understand why the only real escape route is exactly through what you've been avoiding your entire life. You have spent your entire existence trying to become someone others would approve of. You wore masks of goodness, control, emotional stability. You attempted fitting into expectations, hiding shame, burying ugliness. But the more you tried escaping your shadow, the stronger it became. It became more present in your actions, fears, unconscious decisions. Now perhaps you're beginning to realize that everything you attributed to bad luck, external sabotage, cruel fate, was simply you being driven by parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge. Do you want freedom? Then look directly at what you avoid most within yourself, because that's where the key exists, the portal. The shadow isn't the end, it's the crossing. It's the fertile ground where authentic freedom is born. Not superficial freedom of doing whatever you want, but inner freedom from enslavement to unconscious impulses, automatic patterns, repetitions whose origins you don't understand. When you integrate your shadow, something changes permanently. You stop self-sabotage. You stop blaming the world. You stop living in terror of yourself because now you know there's nothing left to hide. You see yourself completely, light and darkness, fragility and power. When you see yourself completely, no one can manipulate you anymore. Not your history, not your pain, not your traumas, not your masks. But be careful, this isn't a destination. It's ongoing work. The shadow lives and it returns, tests, tries to catch you off guard. That's why the consciousness path never ends. You need vigilance, observation, psychological care, as you would care for something sacred. Because if you become careless, it will again take control of your life, and you will again call it bad luck, failure, destiny. So I invite you to make a pact with yourself right now, a pact of honesty, courage, responsibility. Stop running from who you are. Begin today. Write, observe your triggers, reflect. Most importantly, share. In the comments, tell me, which aspect of your shadow do you find hardest to accept? What emotion, desire, or impulse do you pretend you don't feel, but know exists? Let's discuss it openly, because the more you speak about it, the more light enters. And the more light exists, the less control darkness has over you. Have you ever wondered why some people seem to have emotional mastery, while others are constantly hijacked by feelings they don't understand? Have you ever questioned why you keep repeating identical patterns, attracting similar problems, making the same mistakes despite your best conscious intentions? The answer lies in understanding that you are not just your conscious mind. You are also everything you've pushed into your psychological shadows. Until you develop a relationship with these shadow aspects, they will continue driving your life from behind the scenes. But here's what gives me hope, and should give you hope. Every person who does this work, who faces their shadow with courage, becomes a force for healing in the world. Not because they become perfect, but because they become whole. They stop projecting their unowned darkness onto others. They stop being susceptible to manipulation by leaders who exploit shadow dynamics. They become capable of genuine relationships because they're no longer hiding fundamental parts of themselves. Your shadow work isn't just personal healing. It's a contribution to our collective human healing. Every integrated person makes the world slightly less dangerous, slightly more conscious, slightly more whole. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are, not who you think you should be, not who others expect you to be, but who you actually are, including the parts you've been terrified to acknowledge." We have journeyed together into human psychology's most challenging territory. We have explored how your shadow formed, how it operates, how it can be recognized, and how it can be transformed from adversary to ally. The question now isn't whether you have a shadow. You do. The question is whether you will have the courage to face it, integrate it, become whole rather than remaining a fragment of who you could be. This work isn't easy. It requires confronting everything you've spent your life avoiding. It demands radical self-honesty. It asks you to embrace your full humanity, not just the parts you find acceptable, but the alternative is remaining enslaved to unconscious forces, continuing to repeat patterns you don't understand, continuing to sabotage your own happiness and growth. Jung believed human development's goal isn't perfection, but wholeness, not becoming flawless, but becoming complete. This includes shadow integration. It means having access to your full range of human capacities while choosing wisely how to express them. The world doesn't need more people pretending perfection. It needs more people who are courageously authentic, individuals who know their capacity for both creation and destruction and consciously choose creation. Your shadow work is an act of service, not just to yourself, but to everyone whose life you touch, because integrated people create healthier relationships, more authentic communities, and a more conscious world. I challenge you to begin this work today. Start paying attention to your emotional reactions. Notice what you judge most harshly in others. Begin the dialogue with the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. Remember, the darkness you fear isn't separate from you. It is part of you. When approached with courage and wisdom, it becomes a source of power, creativity, and authentic strength. In the comments below, share one insight you've gained about your own shadow from this exploration. What aspect of yourself have you been avoiding? What do you most judge in others that might be pointing toward your own shadow content? Your willingness to engage in this conversation creates a community of people committed to wholeness rather than perfection, to truth rather than image, to integration rather than denial. The choice is yours. Will you remain half a person, living from only the parts of yourself you find acceptable? Or will you dare to become whole, embracing all of who you are while choosing consciously how to express it? If this exploration has resonated with you, subscribe to the channel for more content on psychological integration and personal transformation. Your journey toward wholeness continues. The darkness is not your enemy, it is your teacher. And the lesson it offers is this: you are far more than you have allowed yourself to be.